Cost of living is up. Let's have a look. Good morning everyone, Florian Heise here with my morning stein of coffee, and I thought we would have a look at a few articles discussing the recent CPI increase here in Australia. Inflation is up. Now before we jump in and have a look at this article from the ABC, I've got another one at news.com I want to talk about. We'll jump over here and I want to highlight a video I did on inflation and housing. This is one I did last month, in which we discussed just the impact of housing if it were to be included in inflation. I think it's a very good video that you should have a look, particularly because, well, I learned from it that in CPI, the Consumer Price Index from the Australian Bureau of Statistics is not considered a cost of living index. It isn't. It is not. It may feel like it, but it isn't, because it's frankly not thorough enough. So let's look at the changes. The all group CPI rose 0.5% this quarter, compared to a rise of 0.6% in the June 2019 quarter. Rose 1.7% over the 12 months to the September 2019 quarter, compared to a rise of 1.6% over the 12 months to the June 2019 quarter. So, I mean, it's heading up. We have a look here. Let's look at the all group items. Food and non-alcoholic beverages, it's gone up 0.5 and 1.7. Alcohol and tobacco is up. Everything is up except for health, transport and communication. These three are down. Communication is down 4.1%. Wonder why that is. Recreation and culture is up. So, and here they've got a little chart showing the quarterly distribution. Now, let's jump through and have a look at two articles, one from the ABC and one from news.com. Because while technically it isn't a measure of, cost of living increases, in reality it can be seen as a good thumbstick. A good rule of thumb, a good comparison or indicator of where it's heading. If CPI is going up, you can bet your bottom dollar that your cost of living is going to go up. So, the Australia inflation rate should be Australian inflation rate. So the Australian inflation rate has continued to undershoot Reserve Bank expectations, with cost of living rising by 1.7% over the year end of September. So it's gone up by 1.7%, but it's technically not a cost of living increase. The RBA's preferred measure of underlying inflation, stripping out volatile items such as food and fuel prices, came in at 1.6%, roughly unchanged. So, see this, how they manipulate the data? Food and fuel. Frankly, I think they're some of the most important things that have an effect on your day-to-day living expenses, don't they? Underlying inflation has been anchored under the RBA's 2 to 3% target band since early 2016. While inflation remains weak, the September quarter result is marginally ahead of expectations and further eases pressure on the RBA's need to cut interest rates next week, given unemployment edged down in September. I mean, these are just tiny little changes. And think about the drastic manipulation of the market that has had to occur to result in this. The market's initial reaction saw the odds of a rate cut on Melbourne Cup Day slashed to just 5%, while the Australian dollar edged up. That could also be because the Fed in the US cut interest rates for a third time. While headline annual inflation edged up from the previous reading, the September quarter traditionally sees solid price rises in highly taxed and regulated sectors such as tobacco and property rates. Stripping out seasonal impacts, inflation was a much softer 0.3% over the quarter, rather than the 0.5% headline. And what do we have here? Headline CPI trimmed. So you can see there. I mean, it's still been below 2 to 3% for a while. And remember, inflation is a decrease in your purchasing power. And there's a few ways to look at inflation, and we'll discuss that later. Housing subdues inflation. Annual inflation remains subdued partly due to price rises for housing-related expenses remaining low, and in some cases falling in annual levels, the Australian Bureau of Statistics Chief Economist Bruce Hockman said. Prices for utilities are down 0.3%, and new dwelling purchase price by owner-occupiers, negative 0.1%. Both fell slightly through the year to the end of September 2019 quarter, while rents were up. Not surprising. Mr. Hockman said despite falls in fruit and vegetable prices over the quarter, the drought was starting to have an impact on a range of other foods. And here we go. This is where we're going to have the biggest impact on our cost of living. It's going to be with drought, water, petrol, food. Prices rose this quarter for meat and seafood, 1.7%, dairy and related products, 2.2%, and bread and cereal products, 1.3%. Meat and seafood, 1.7%. Damn it, I like my meat. I like my meat. International travel was the most significant contributor to the rise in inflation, while property rates and childcare both rose 2.5%. Fuel slipped 2%. The price spike from the attack on Saudi facilities occurring too late in the quarter to have much of an impact. So we can see here what's going down, what's going up. Overseas holiday travel and accommodation is up, tobacco's up, childcare's up. I mean, this childcare will have an impact on a lot of people day to day. Clothing and footwear. There comes a point where childcare is too expensive to warrant doing it and working. So rates on hold. CBA economist Christina Clifton said there was some tentative signs low inflation may be bottoming out. The percentage of the CPI basket rising at less than 2% has dropped to its lowest level since early 2015, while underlying inflation annualized over the past 6 months has lifted a little too, Ms. Clifton said. While noting the flexibility of the RBA's approach, Ms. Clifton said, with core inflation under the target band for almost 4 years, more needs to be done. 5 quarters of misses is starting to feel like a long time, and it's likely to be very several more years until inflation picks up to that target, she said. The CBA House view is interest rates will be on hold for the rest of this year, but another cut is likely in February. Given the 3 cash rate cuts since June, we think that the RBA will want to take some time to assess the impacts of lower interest rates before deciding on whether to cut rates again, Ms. Clifton said. So, I mean, there we go. That's an interesting take on it, looking at what is going up in inflation and what is going down. Let's have a look at a few things, because we're hearing more and more about inflation and what is inflation. Now, I'll bring up the Misesian take on inflation, the Austrian thought. So an increase in the quantity of money, in the broader sense of the term, so as to include fiduciary media as well, that is not offset by a corresponding increase in the need for money, again in the broader sense of the term, so that a fall in the objective exchange value of money must occur. So this is he's taking the argument that is due to increased monetary supply, and that is one approach to it. Money supply is going up. What drives up money supply? How is money created? Well, the banks create money when they lend it out. That's how it happens. So what drives up the demand for housing money? Foreign investment in housing, creating loans, more people buying loans, more borrowing, increased mortgages. That's increased monetary supply. That will drive up inflation. There's other theories to it as well. There's the cost versus pull demand inflation. I think this is also interesting to bring all these things together to try and get understanding of what's happening, because we keep hearing about it in the media all the time, and the RBA want to get it in their range. Cost push inflation versus demand pull inflation, an overview. And this is from Investopedia, my favorite website, one of them. I've got a lot of favorite websites, and none of them sponsor Heise says. That has to change one day. Did anyone see any of your favorite YouTubers pushing the whole VPN, and then it was discovered that the VPN was hacked? I think Mighty Jingles did it, and a week later they had a Jingles landing. I kind of feel sorry for them. So, there are 4 main drivers behind inflation. Among them are cost push inflation, or the decrease in the aggregate supply of goods and services stemming from an increase in the cost of production, and demand pull inflation, or the increase in aggregate demand categorized by the 4 sections of the macroeconomy. The two other contributing factors to inflation include an increase in the money supply of an economy and a decrease in the demand for money. So, I mean, we could have cost push inflation. So the cost of things are going up, and that's driving up the costs of goods and services. That would be, well, petrol goes up, and that pushes up the cost for goods and services. That would also be in the Australian economy. We'll have a look here. You know, this is from the Observatory of Economic Complexity, and we can see what we're exporting. But the issue is what we are importing. You can see here all the products that Australia is importing. Now, the Australian dollar has gone up, so that means the purchasing capacity of us to purchase these imported goods should technically improve. And that should drive down the cost of these items. But if the Australian dollar goes down, the cost of these items as well will then go up. Cars, refined petroleum, imported broadcasting equipment, computer components, and that all factors in to the cost of living. So then we have demand pull inflation, or the increase in aggregate demand, okay, categorized by the four sections of the macroeconomy. We've got increased monetary supply, and we're seeing that's happening from the banks, and a decrease in the demand for money. So remember, inflation is the rate at which the general price level of goods and services rise. This in turn causes a drop in purchasing power. So this means that your money is going to have less capacity to buy things. It means things will be more expensive. It means that the money that you've worked hard and saved for loses its value. So this is not to be confused with the change in the prices of individual goods and services, which rise and fall all the time. Inflation happens when prices rise across the economy to a certain degree. So key takeaways. Cost push inflation is the decrease in the aggregate supply of goods and services stemming from an increase in the cost of production. And this could be, well, increased labor costs, increased other costs. How do people offset that? Well, they offshore here in Australia. Demand pull inflation is the increase in aggregate demand categorized by the four sections of the macroeconomy: household, business, governments, and foreign buyers. An increase in the cost of raw materials or labor can contribute to cost pull inflation. Demand pull inflation can be caused by an expanding economy, increased government spending, or overseas growth. So what type of inflation do you think is going on here in Australia at the moment? What type of inflation do you think is going on here in Australia? What do you think? Do you think it's cost pull? Do you think it's an increased supply? Do you think housing, increased loans and mortgages, spending on housing? I think it obviously seems like there's a few things going on. You've got our food costs and our bills costs going up due to increased, costs, increased costs and lower supply. There's food being grown. You've got increased monetary supply by additional borrowing to get into the housing market because the interest rates have been pushed lower. So all these things are coming together, and our inflation is going up. You need to think about it. Where's it going to end? Is it going to be a good thing, or is it going to be a bad thing for the economy? And how can you prepare to deal with this? Let me know your suggestions in the comments. Where do you think it's all heading? What are you investing in to offset that? A lot of people they either buy into stocks, or they will go into traditional precious metals to try and hedge or maintain some of the value of their assets over time to offset inflation. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. Please, if you'd like to support the channel, I have a Patreon and Subscribe Star, and all your support is greatly appreciated. And I will talk to you all again later today. Take care.